Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Mouthy Money podcast. Today, I am joined by Mike Ambery, who is, Mike, let me make sure I'm not getting your job title wrong here. He is Retirement Savings Director at Standard Life. Now, Standard Life is a big pensions and financial services provider, and they've got an interesting bit of research that Mike's joining me to discuss today. Mike, thank you very much for joining me.
A pleasure, Edmund. Good to be able to be here with you.
So today we've got you on because Standard Life has a new report out. Before I dive into that with you, just give me a bit of background about yourself and tell us a bit about Standard Life as well.
Yeah, sure, love to. So I've been working at Standard Life for 8 months now. Why did I work for Standard Life? It's one of the biggest providers. It is, in fact, the biggest provider of retirement and savings benefits within the UK, responsible for 12 million customers and assets of over £300 billion, with a real purpose of making sure that we deliver better outcomes for customers.
So you've joined me today firstly because Standard Life produces an annual report called Retirement Voice, which I believe is in its fourth iteration now. Is that right?
So you That's do it correct, every year. Yes. Yeah.
But you've got, it's something more specific to discuss, and obviously I think people would have guessed from the title of the podcast and that kind of thing, and that is the problem of pensions for Generation X. Now, Generation X, and we talk about generations all the time, and often a lot of these discussions are couched in terms of talking about baby boomers and millennials, and actually now more recently we talk about Gen Z a lot, don't we? And Gen X sometimes get a little bit forgotten in the middle of this. Now, Mike, are you Generation X? Because I'm a millennial. I'll say up front. Would you count yourself among that generation?
Yes, this impacts me, Edmund. So it's one of the issues of my generation.
So Generation X, broadly speaking, and obviously these generations, it's a bit broad brushstrokes, but broadly speaking, Gen X is people born between the mid-1960s and the late 1970s. So that puts people in the age bracket of what, between kind of mid-40s to late 50s at this point. Is that about right, I'd say?
That's absolutely spot
late
on,
50s,
Edmund.
maybe even early 60s. So what is the issue that your report has identified for Gen X and their pensions?
Yeah, we wanted to sort of unearth a bit of a finding, which is Gen X have possibly slipped through a bit of a pensions savings gap in a way, and they've missed out on a little bit of pension. So if I explain what that sort of means is we have and had two different versions of pension, a defined benefit scheme, which is really a pension offered in a workplace probably till the year 2000-ish for private employers, where their employer funded contributions. It was extremely expensive. Many employers decided to get out of it in favour of a DC pension, which was offered voluntarily to individuals at the point of the time in the 2000s. A DC pension is that currently offered by most employers in the UK. I think about 96% of private sector workers have a DC pension, which is effectively contributions. A pot of money builds up until a point of retirement, and individuals decide how they take their money at that point of retirement. So those are the bit of explanations there. For Gen X's, there's a period between, say, about 2000 where those defined benefit schemes closed, wrapped up from employers, and DC schemes were available, where some individuals didn't actually take up joining those schemes. What happened in 2013 was automatic enrolment, where effectively employers had to enroll anyone between certain ages and certain salaries in pension schemes. So those Gen X individuals might have missed out between, say, 2000 and 2013, 14, 15, in around a decade-ish of pension. So this report sort of highlights Gen X may be missing out on a certain level of pensions where you yourself as a millennial might well have benefited from being automatically enrolled at a later point in time.
Yeah, so essentially, what's happened here is a generation has sort of fallen through the gap in the middle of pension policy, and huge changes in the way pensions work in the UK. As you said, kind of the end of the era of those kind of final salary pensions that I think probably looms large in a lot of people's minds, particularly even today. People kind of misunderstand how pensions work and the fact that everything you contribute in, that's what comes out at the other end. In terms of the scale of the issue for Gen X, obviously there's going to be variety in there, isn't there? Because there are going to be people who are relatively high earners who probably have done okay in catching up. How big an issue is it for Gen X? And what has the report kind of found in that sense?
Yeah, it's sort of hard to say in terms of how many individuals it impacted. And as you say, it depends upon salary and otherwise, and whether people voluntarily joined a pension scheme if they exited a DB scheme at that sort of time. I guess in 2000, there was 9.1 million people in those defined benefit pension schemes. By 2012, there was 6.8 million in there. So there's around about 2.5 million people that had drifted outside of a pension scheme system. That might be naturally drifting out of the system, or it might be people who have exited and then not joined. So there could be, into millions of people that maybe have lost out for a period of maybe a decade of pension saving, which it depends on their salary, depends on their individual circumstances. But certainly if it's as most as a decade or even 15 years, individuals may have lost out of a particular working period, a working lifetime, where they haven't built up any particular pension benefits for that time.
And this comes alongside. It's I think it's something I've talked about quite a lot before on the podcast. The kind of broader issues we have with how people understand pensions and the way pensions work in this country. And one of the biggest issues we have as well is reliance on it is one thing, but the understanding that they're going to get something that's perhaps not as valuable as they see in terms of state pension. So state pension in the UK, as your report points out, is one of the least generous in Europe, so compared to kind of peer countries. But people are still very reliant, looking to the future, to the state pension for their kind of retirement income. But that's probably a misplaced reliance, right? Would that be fair to say?
It's fair to say. So it's an emotive issue, as you've covered before, and as you say right now. Individuals do rely on a state pension. It's not means tested. It's built up through adequacy of national insurance contributions over a given lifetime. It does, in my opinion, create a minimum standard of living effectively if you get a full state pension. It's great. Current government have sort of heavily relied upon triple lock, i.e. increases in line with inflation or earnings or otherwise, which are really important. So you don't want to be priced out of the market as an individual receiving a state pension. But as we say, that state pension is a minimum standard of living in retirement. Thus, individuals, if they want more than a minimum standard of living, which I think the majority probably aspire to or otherwise, then they're looking for private savings to achieve that. Historically, we've had defined benefit pension schemes which do exactly what they say. It's a defined benefit. It's a guarantee of a benefit that will be paid for life when in retirement. So that's a very valuable benefit. The transition between 2000s and to 2012 and to what most people in the private sector get right now is a defined contribution pension scheme. That is effectively a pot of money that builds up through contributions, through hopefully positive investment returns over a period. That pot of money can then be utilised in a variety of mechanisms: cash, drawdown, annuity, a wealth of those products at the point of retirement to then supplement and top up that state pension. at the point of retirement. So it is really important that other pots are built up. We've been really fortunate in the UK with automatic enrolment. So those people that are workers between particular ages, 22 and state pension age, have been able to build up a pot of money. That pot of money can then translate to an income stream at the point of retirement to supplement state pension.
So thinking about before, I think we're going to come on to what anybody listening in this position can do, and anything they can think about in order to improve those kind of private pension pot prospects and that kind of thing. But I thought it was really interesting in the report looking at sort of what people see as their kind of primary assets at the moment, and there's a very and I mean, I think this is probably feeds through to older generations as well to an extent. There's a significant reliance on property as a primary source of kind of retirement savings, I guess you call it, even though property as a kind of retirement asset, it's not straightforward, is it? Because how do you unlock how do you unlock cash from a property is not an easy thing. Is that fair to say? Is there too much reliance on kind of property? It's an issue, isn't it? Because it's often the most straightforward way for somebody to be saving, if you're assuming you get on the ladder.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Is there a heavy reliance? I think there's a question there of, with owning a home, there's a real clarity for individuals that they aren't paying rent in retirement, which gives a security, it gives a protection and a peace of mind. If you add that to a state pension and any private pension, it enables individuals to look at a whole of all of their sort of assets to determine how they want to live at the point of retirement. They might choose to live on either the state pension and their private pension. They might choose to downsize property or utilise lifetime mortgages or equity release mortgages as different methods of accessing some of the equity within their homes, to have different standards of living through retirement, and considering other mechanisms around care and health situations as well. What we found in the report is Gen X's in particular expect their standard of living to be worse in retirement. So 45% of Gen X's expect it to be worse in retirement when they were living, compared to, say, millennials. We're doing a comparison, almost a top trumps between us, of millennials having 29% feel that their standard of living will be worse in retirement.
Yeah, I do find that's quite interesting. There does seem to be more optimism, sort of, obviously, the older generation who've benefited from the better, well, I mean, frankly, the better asset growth of things like property that has done really well, in the past 30, 40 years, plus those kind of old style pensions. And then you look lower down the age toward millennials and Gen Z, and there is a bit more confidence there, as you say, because my generation more or less entered the workplace and were given pensions, or if we weren't given ones, we only, it was maybe for 3 or 4 years or something like that we missed out before auto enrollment really kicked in. But Gen X are facing this kind of long gap in retirement savings. But what's interesting is Gen X as an age cohort, and obviously this depends on individual circumstances, but talking about averages here, people in their 40s and 50s, those tend to be the best earning years, don't they? Those are years when you are earning more than at any other point in your life, typically. So thinking about that, what do Gen X need to do? What can they do to fix it? Is there hope that they can take from, what they're doing now with the pensions they've got? What else could they be doing?
Yeah, I think I'd probably say is there's definitely hope. Let's not view this as completely negative for those in Gen X or anyone in any principle. Time's on the side. There's probably a decade-ish plus for Gen X's to look at this and indeed make contributions to their pension scheme. Let's not forget individuals that are part of private sector pensions. Their employers also make contributions to the pension scheme. So it's worthwhile checking in to look at the pension arrangement that an individual is in, and indeed contributing, and maybe contributing a little bit more over a longer period. Effectively, pensions are tax-free to a given level, so they're highly valuable. in terms of both that employer contribution, the tax-free nature, builds up over a period of time. So if there's a gap, like we say, for those in Gen X, they've got a long period of time to be able to build backup funds that are sufficient or give some level of sufficiency and confidence at the point of retirement that they will have streams of income to supplement what would be sort of state pensions at the point in time. So I'd definitely say don't give up hope. There's methods around that of just purely on pension contributions. I won't go into other asset classes. There are securities around home ownership, building up that home ownership, which I think millennials are probably focused on as well, if that's helpful. Don't know whether it's useful me sort of explaining a little bit more around the millennials' optimism at the same point as a comparison to Gen X's. Just in terms of that, our
Yeah,
research,
definitely.
brilliant, thank you. Well, our research showed that millennials have a more optimistic look. I think almost half, I think it was 45%, felt they were more confident, saving enough to have a comfortable retirement. That's quite considerable difference to only a third of Gen X's. It might sort of linked to a bit of attitude change with millennials. I think one of the main findings of the report said to me, millennials are anticipating they will have longer to build up their pension. True, which is the hope and optimism. I guess if you're younger, you have longer of that hope and optimism. The other thing is millennials expect to work a little bit longer than Gen X. On average, expecting to work beyond the state pension age as it currently is. I think over 50%, 51% of millennials expect to work beyond state pension age and thus gain a comfortable point in retirement, whereas Gen Xs are a little bit more restrictive and against working past state pension age, with only 42% of individuals wanting or at least considering working past that age. In the same respect as before, we've said a couple of things. Millennials probably less reliant on the state pension. They've been benefited and being automatically enrolled in their employer scheme for a longer period of time. So view that they'll be able to build up more of that private provision and have longer to build up that private provision, whereas Gen X is closer to retirement, possibly think they have less time to build up more of a sufficient pot if they've missed out on building up a pot over the last few years. One other thing I'd probably mention is millennials are a wee bit more cautious in terms of their own finances. We've gone through COVID, we've gone through other mechanisms, so probably millennials have a bit more of a cautious attitude, I'd say, in our research compared to Gen X's in how their spend is, their cost of living issues, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, that experience speaks. I mean, to my own experience in the sense that I think there's probably more cynicism around things like state pension, where it's kind of like we know that we're never really going to get the state pension that people get today, and that the age is going to keep increasing. Whether we retain things like triple lock and stuff is always up for discussion, and how valuable that pension, which we've already said is one of the worst in Europe, is going to be in retirement. But the benefit is we are still relatively young and have time to do something about that. And I guess that's what's difficult for Gen X, is they are a bit older. There is also the issue for Gen X, and I thought about this, was millennials have started to have slightly elderly parents now, but Gen X will have very generally speaking, very elderly parents at this point who they may be having to help out with at home, take time off work, all that kind of stuff. It's difficult. They've also still got kids who are probably, not necessarily flown the nest yet, probably under the age of 18, still at school, that kind of thing. So they've got that cost. They're really, it's quite unfortunate to say, it's quite an unlucky generation in that sense. But I think I like your message of hope, Mike. I think it's really important to say, that you still have time on your side. It's never too late. Obviously, the more time you have, particularly for long-term saving and saving for retirement, the better. But yeah, it's tricky. It's a tricky one to get right.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's a generation that is a cash squeeze. As you say, you could be caring for elderly parents and having to fund for some of that for a period. Equally, like you say, you could be paying out school or university fees in that sort of squeeze generation at that point in time. What I would say is, as I said before, don't lose out hope. Look at finances. If there's an ability to utilise additional, if you have that spare cash to make additional contributions, or look at the contributions that are offered by an employer, then look at those and see that you're not missing out on any match contributions from the employer. And really just consider the long term and that fluctuating spends that come through life cycle. So it needn't be a one-off decision. It needn't be a loss of hope. It's I'll probably restore a bit of faith and say keep that hope, and where it does allow amongst that cash squeeze, maybe consider the now and the future, because everybody needs to enjoy the now as well in their spending. But equally, if there's a little bit that can be squeezed out to enable a future lifetime of possibilities, then enabling that would be also good.
Absolutely. Well, I think some really, really interesting stuff to think about there. We will put a link to the full report for anybody who wants to read in the show notes. But just briefly, Mike, if anybody wants to jump online and have a look for it, where can they find it?
They'll find it at the Standard Life homepage, so please click through to have a look at that. And if you need any other details, any other support from us as a customer or a prospective, really happy to help anyone.
Brilliant. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you everybody for listening in. We've got a really busy schedule coming up in the next few weeks as we get close to Christmas. Lots more guests and lots more topics to be discussing, so please do stay tuned. Thank you everybody, and goodbye. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube. You can also follow all our latest updates on TikTok, Instagram, or X. Finally, check out all our money stories on the Mouthy Money website and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for all the latest straight to your inbox. Thank you and goodbye.